Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to another episode of Spare a Thought, which will be coming to your earbuds very shortly. This is an episode I recorded with my good pal, Lily Mott, who is the director of the Be the Change Media Network. We talked about how to live a creative life, sharing examples from our own lives, as well as stories of people who have gone on to do many interesting things creatively. In a world where algorithms and AI are increasingly acting as gatekeepers, we want to explore how you can find your field and sit in it by using agency, talent, and determination. This episode was recorded in mid-December, so any references to next year are referring to 2026. I hope you enjoy it. It's a really thought-provoking piece as we move through the idea of what it means to live a creative life. I wanted to post it now because there's so much focus on productivity in January. I've always found that a bit odd because we're in peak winter. Our energy levels aren't necessarily at the point required for high productivity. However, January is a wonderful time to be reflective, to focus on inside things, and to be creative in our own ways. It's a great time to start new things, yes, but to be gentle with yourself and to put into practice what you want to do in the months ahead when it gets sunnier and brighter. I hope you enjoy the episode. This is Living a Creative Life with Lily Mott. Enjoy. Hello, Lily.
Thank you for having me, Tom. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, very exciting. So, Lily, I want to start with a story that's been bothering me recently. So, a friend of mine has an 18-year-old daughter who recently applied for a retail job, which is pretty standard stuff. She filled out an application, she answered some scenario questions online, and then first round screening, sort of know the drill kind of vibe. But here's the thing. She wasn't screened by a person, she was being screened by AI. And when she finished, the AI told her that she didn't make it through. And the feedback was she needs to be more personable. An algorithm told a teenager she wasn't human enough for a minimum wage job.
That's the world that we're living in now, and I think I have heard lots of other stories like this because of these online interviews now where you just record something and then it goes into a system and you have a certain amount of time to record the answer and stuff. So yeah, I've heard these too, but that's our world right now.
Yeah, and it's very unsettling. And also it's like, as we'll see, sort of impacting younger folks, probably more frequently than it is people that are established in their careers. And it's not just one bad interview experience. This is like emblematic of something much larger. So we're seeing a record number of young people not in education, employment, or training. And the barriers keep getting higher. So the gatekeepers are increasingly algorithmic. And we wonder why people are asking, what's the incentive to work? So, what's the point of trying?
I think that's something that I think about a lot as well. And we've had these conversations, Tom, about especially the work that we're doing at Be the Change. And we're trying to amplify young people's voices, but there are so many issues that young people are facing, and there's systemic barriers that make it so much harder for young people to be heard. And it's harder to get started, like you were saying, and it's harder to build a creative life and a creative voice. I think when you have AI and when people are using it to write whole essays or whole emails for them, that's becoming much more difficult too. So it's a really difficult time to be navigating workplaces but also creative projects too, I think.
And that's what I want to talk about today. So not to pretend those barriers don't exist, because that's sort of the worst thing, because they do, but to explore how we can actually live creative lives anywhere. How we can find our field, sustain the work, and make our contribution despite everything that's pushing against us. I think because we have more agency than we realize.
Yeah, I'm here for that conversation. I'm excited. Sounds good.
Yeah, awesome. So let's dive in. I had a stable job, decent pension, what most people would call a promising career path. And then I gave it all up.
And why?
Because I realized I wasn't on the path that I'd chosen. It had just sort of happened. I'd gotten my first job at a students' union after university, and then sort of another role and another, and it was all safe. It was fine. but I don't think it was really my path that I was meant to be on. I wasn't really following my passion. I was existing on a path that had emerged largely by accident, lacking sort of direction or real goals. And at some point, I had to admit that this isn't my field.
And what do you mean by field?
So it's something a lecturer once told my brother Dave. So Dave's an artist. And when he was at university, sort of struggling a bit, a lecturer said to him, you have to find your field and sit in it. So find something you're good at, hone your skills, and pursue it no matter the hurdles. And I love that phrase because it's not passive. It's not like wait for your calling or follow your bliss. It's find your field, make a choice, then commit to it.
I think that's really interesting because there's a lot of people, especially when they're graduating, leaving university, or just starting out kind of in their early career path, whatever that is. I think they're waiting for that clarity and they're waiting for the perfect role to come to them or the obvious path to kind of reveal itself. And I don't think that it works like that for many, many people. Maybe there's a few people who kind of fall into their dream role and then just keep going from there. But I think that's really not the norm for people.
My brother left with school with one GCSE, so he failed his first year of university, but he had this dream, I want to be an artist in a big city. It's what he said when he was like 16 or something to a careers advisor. And it took him over 10 years to get there. He worked retail, he worked catering, but the vocation was always the art. So he used those survival jobs to fund his painting. And I suppose also we have to caveat a lot of this with the reality of like the cost of living. Like, it's very expensive just to do the basics, and creativity and searching for a creative life does not come cheap, and it comes at a cost in many ways. You throw yourself into it. When you are a creative, you're probably more, you're putting yourself, everything you have into what you do, because your ideas are the things that are driving you forward. It's not necessarily a particular like skill that you have in terms of maybe, you're very good at mathematics or something like that. Something that uses that lots of parts of you, and you put yourself into a very vulnerable position. Today, he's a designer and an artist in a big city. He did the thing, but it wasn't, a straight line.
I think that that's a really hard thing, especially today with instant gratification. And obviously we post things and we have that sense of needing likes and the validation that comes with that. I think that's the really, really hard part, is the persistence when you are putting so much of yourself into the work that you're putting out into the world and you're not automatically getting that gratification. I think that that's becoming increasingly harder, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and here's what gives me hope, that there are contemporary examples that show this still works. Look at Amelia Dimoldenberg and Chicken Shop Day. Have you seen Chicken Shop Day?
I've seen it. I actually, so I didn't get to talk with her, but I was like in a circle with Amelia Dimoldenberg once. I like saw her in person and stuff. So yeah, she's exactly, I feel like, how she is online. Like her vibe is very similar. So I love it. I've seen it before, and the next time I see her, I'll be sure to actually talk with her. But unfortunately, I was just kind of like hanging out, creeping. So
Yeah. So you've been in, that's really cool. Where was that? What
I went to, so the old organization that I work for has a really good relationship with Alistair Campbell, and Grace Campbell, Alistair Campbell's daughter, is a stand-up comedian, and she's like awesome. She's hilarious, and a lot of her stuff is about politics and kind of loosely related to her path, and being like a nepo baby and stuff. She like makes a lot of her content around that, but she never actually mentions who her dad is, which is kind of funny. Like obviously there's hints at it and stuff, and most people know based off of her last name, but yeah, it was really cool. So we got tickets to go to her show, and then I guess Amelia Dimoldenberg might be friends with her or something. So she was there like with us, and we got to be with Alistair Campbell and some of the other big wigs, I guess, that were there. But it was really cool. It was like just a very random opportunity that came up, and I was like, yeah, I'll go to the show, and then got to see her. So it's very fun.
So Amelia started when she was 17, writing in a column for her local youth magazine. Then in 2014, when she was about 20, she met a camera operator and turned her work into a YouTube channel. And that very first video got, I think, like 1,000 views in like 2 weeks or something, which is in itself really good engagement as someone that hasn't got any backing behind her. And then she found her field, so that unique deadpan style, which sounds like she has in real life too. And she sat in it for years, basically. So that channel now has over 600 million views. She didn't wait for a network. She used the platform that she had.
That is the lesson with all of this. And, with Amelia Dimoldenberg, and of course, there's so many other people now who start up passion projects and they start, talking about things that they're passionate about, or they start with these creative journeys and then it turns into their job later. But you have to start somewhere and you have to choose to begin. Otherwise, you're not going to get to that point. You have to get started.
Yeah, 100%. And the other example I want to give is like Olivia Dean. She's one of my favorites. I mean, I love her music. I think sort of the whole life that she's cultivated around her, and she's dominated the chart. She's sold out loads of dates for the O2 next year. But this is like a reward for a lifetime of dedication. She went to the Brit School, which is I think in Croydon, and she met her manager when she was 17. And so her manager asked her, what are your goals? And Olivia Dean said, I want to make an album, I want to play Jules Holland, and I want to play Glastonbury. And that's what she wanted to do. And she's done all of those things and much, much more. And I wouldn't be surprised at some point if she headlines Glastonbury in the next few years. I mean, that's definitely her career trajectory. But what happened between being 17 and now? I think she's about 26, so she's sort of been working professionally for about 10 years. She played in fields where nobody showed up. She performed with her band at a seafood restaurant. She toured in her van during the pandemic with her bandmates. So there's plenty of false dawns. Like, her career was just about to get big, and then 2020 happened and the pandemic happened.
Mm-hmm. But she kept going through it, and that's the important part.
Yeah, exactly. And she kept going because she had a sort of vision of what she wanted to do. And now she makes music on her own terms at a really high quality. She had the talent. She was persistent. She worked hard and she built connections along the way. And obviously she's, the talent is the key bit, but it's persistence too. It's not giving up.
I think that that's something that a lot of people don't talk about or necessarily always think about, is the years between I want to do this and kind of getting started, and then I'm actually doing this. And I think there's also something, for me, I think there's this personal jump between I want to do this, the idea, and then I'm doing this, getting started with the project, but then turning it professional or making it into a career. I think for me, that's the scariest jump. I think that part is terrifying. And I've had this conversation with a few people, because this could be with a creative project, but this could also be pursuing, your own consulting business or your own, freelance work or something. That jump where you don't really have the support system anymore. I think that that's really scary. And I'm sure with these examples, there was that decision where they had to say, okay, I need to quit my side jobs, or I need to, focus on this if it's going to be something. And I think that takes a lot of courage to actually make that full jump. But those middle years where you're kind of in between and you're not sure if you want to commit yet, and you're not really sure if what you're doing is working, I think that that's really scary. And it's a really messy time for people.
It'd be really interesting to hear about your sort of your middle year experiences, I guess, because you started Be the Change 5 years ago with one voice memo. So what made you sort of keep going from that moment to where you are now?
I think for me, at the beginning, I wasn't really thinking about what it would become at all. I think I just was in this situation where, I'll tell the story very, very briefly, but I was at a protest at Lafayette Square Park, and Trump cleared protesters out of the park using the National Guard. He deployed the National Guard, and they used tear gas and fired on people with rubber bullets. And it was a really scary moment in that moment in the civil rights movement in the US at the time. And I think it was a moment, of course, that now is historical because of what happened, and we're seeing a lot of history repeating itself today. But at that time, I think a lot of the news that I was seeing was around like the looting and the destruction being caused by protesters rather than a lot of the courage and the heart that people were showing in these moments and showing up day after day and protesting and putting themselves in danger. Of course, it was during the pandemic, and when there's people tear gassing protesters, that's putting yourself in a lot of harm. So I was super overwhelmed by that whole experience, but felt like I needed to share it. And my community, my friends and my family could get a lot of hearing me share, because I think, you see certain perspectives on the news, but having someone who you actually know who was in that situation, I think it does make a difference. And of course, that's the power of storytelling, which we can also talk about a little bit later. But I think when you hear someone's experience and you know them and you can see them talking about it, you can feel them talking about it, it's a totally different thing. So I recorded that voice memo, which became the first episode of Be the Change. And then I think for the next few years, honestly, it's been such an interesting process. I was just reflecting while you were talking, Tom, on like the middle, for me, it's probably episodes like 30 to 200 maybe, where I'm like, you can tell that I don't know, it's like a very interesting thing because you can tell that I am doing this in a very rushed way, and I used to do my recording in a very different way than I do it now. And I really don't like going back and listening to a lot of those old episodes because I think that they are not very good quality. And I think that you can tell that some of the interviews, I just am not. I had so many other things going on in my life that you can tell that that I'm not as invested as I would have liked to be, I'm sure. And I think that's really hard because obviously, like when you're juggling so many other things, there are so many interviews that I wish I could go back now and do them again, like with some of those people or having those conversations again and cleaning up the episodes and kind of re-releasing them. But I think that that's kind of part of the charm of this journey as well, is like you are going to have regrets and you're going to have things that you want to do over. But I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't just keep going. So I think even though the quality might not be the best, or they might be things that now I'm like, oh shoot, I wish I would have done that better, they still did need to be published and I still did need to kind of keep going. And I'm really glad that I did keep going, even if some weeks it was really hard to put out an episode, or some weeks I really struggled to get a guest and do the editing process. There were so many times where I would be finishing up an episode and hitting submit and then having to, run off and go do, an event at university, or finish my episode, hit publish, and then stay up all night to write a paper. There's like so much juggling that had to be done. And I think back on a lot of those memories, and I'm really glad that I kept going. But I do think now I look back and I'm like, I wish that I could do it again now, but that's not what everybody can do. So there's no going back now, I guess. But that's my reflection on some of that, is happy that I kept doing it, happy that I kept going. But I think, yeah, there's some that I'm like, dang, I wish I could just shake, 20-year-old me and be like, come on, do a little bit more, put in a little bit more time. But that's I was doing the best I could with my resources. So I think I'm happy that I just kept going. So that's the most important part.
Yeah, and we're all happy you did as well. And I suppose it's also a lesson that the first thing you're going to put out there isn't going to be perfect. Just put it out there, and you will be ahead of a big percent. You're in the top 10%, 5% of people that when, oh, I wanted to start this book, or oh, I want to start this podcast, or I wanted to make a film, like just getting there and doing it. That is the single biggest thing that you can start doing. Start it, because otherwise just going to regret. You're going to get to my age and older and go, oh, I wish looking back, I had so much time to do things.
Yeah. No, I think that's also the hard thing now, and work when I got my first full-time job. I think that you realize how when you're in university, you think, oh, I'm so busy and I've got so much going on. But I would probably say it was harder for me to juggle podcasting and doing all this creative work when I had my full-time job that wasn't Be the Change, because you have so much more flexibility when you're a student. And so I think if there's students listening to this, believe me, you get way busier. So when you say that you were busy back then, and when you think that you're juggling a lot of things, becoming an actual quote unquote, for anyone that's listening, I'm doing air quotes, when you become an adult and when you've got your adult job and you've got, all of these other things to worry about, bills and, payments and all this kind of stuff, it becomes so much more difficult to pursue these projects. So do it while you have the time, use your time now, because I think doing a master's program or doing your undergrad, you do have a lot more time than you're going to have when you get into the next phase of life. So yeah, that's my plea to anyone who's who's at that age and listening to this. Please start, because believe me, you get busier. So.
Yeah. And the sooner you do it, the more hours you put in. And then by the time you get noticed,
Yep.
you'll be really good at what you do. That's a lot of pressure. If you hit the ball, if you hit the ground running immediately, great. That's a lot of things to be publicly making mistakes. So it's really good to sort of hone your craft as well. Can you talk a bit about the Be the Change media network and how that sort of evolved?
Yeah, so the network really got started when we were doing our masters, actually, because at the beginning, when I talked about how much time we had, I think it was a very individualized experience. So you could really use your time in any way for that whole year. I think there was a certain amount of time that had to be devoted to schoolwork, but it was a very little amount of time, at least for my program. So there was so much other time that I had, which I didn't have before. And I could feel myself really getting the urge to do more and invest in more creative projects. So when we met, Tom, and we started to do our radio show, I was doing a radio show called Be the Change on Air, which was live interviews in the studio with Cardiff-based young people who are making change. And I guess Cardiff and Wales and a couple people came from different parts of the UK. But those were the first live interviews that I ever did. And so that was like a compliment to my podcast. So actually, that radio show and my podcast and this little Instagram live series that I was doing, that was Be the Change Media Network at first. I decided to kind of create that because I didn't really know what to call those things. So that was Be the Change Media Network. But then when we met and we met Sid, we had the idea to come up with the Political Dispatch. And I decided, I was like, okay, so I feel like the best way for us to publish this podcast is just to put it under Be the Change podcast, and then we can publish it that way. And then Troy joined with the Forgotten Generation podcast, and all of a sudden there was tons of episodes going out on this one podcast feed. I quickly realized that it just was not going to be sustainable as we started to kind of think about growing and adding more episodes, because people were following this one podcast but getting essentially 3 different shows, and it became a little bit much. So then when you created Spare Thought, Tom, and I think we had a couple of other podcasts and podcasters start to join and develop their ideas, we created individual podcast feeds for all the shows. That was when it became really serious that we could really expand this a lot more. And we did our first recruitment of people at the beginning of 2025, and that first cohort joined, and that was 30 people who came on to create series and podcasts, and it was incredible. I think it has grown so much over the last year, but it really has been over the last year. I think that it's really blown up and our community has grown so much. Now we have about 40 members, because some of that original cohort had other things that they needed to explore. So they weren't creating a podcast on the network anymore, but we recruited new members. We've got people pitching all the time and lots of interest. And I think it's just been really cool to be able to develop this community. And I do think I talked with you a little bit about this, Tom, but it's more of a collective now, where it's all of us on kind of an equal footing, and all of us as creatives being able to shape this network into what we want it to be and into what we need individually, but also as a group. I think that that's exactly what I wanted to create. I don't really see myself as the leader of it as much as like a member that can benefit from it as much as I am putting into it. So I think that's how I hope everyone feels, is that they're kind of all contributing and getting out of the community what they would like. I am really trying to develop this as a space for people to just support one another, but also with that added benefit of being able to actually have the training and produce the content that you envision and kind of making those dreams come to life. Because I think the most common experience that people have had on the network is them saying to me, "Oh, I've had this podcast idea that I've wanted to develop for months and years, but I saw your post on Instagram, or I saw, your post on LinkedIn, and I thought, this is the moment, this is a sign." And I've had so many people say that to me, which is exactly what I want. And that's exactly what we're talking about, Tom, is you need that catalyst moment. You need the switch to flip where you decide, okay, I'm going to actually do it. And if Be the Change Media Network can be that catalyst for people and can be that engine for them, I'm so proud of that. So sorry, that's a little bit of a rant, but that's kind of what we're creating now. And now it's my full-time job, which is crazy. So it's been, of course, about 5.5 years in the making with my podcast, if we're kind of going back to the very beginning. But very seriously, I think the network has been developing for about a year and a half. Lots of growth over that year and a half. So.
Yeah, it's super cool, and it's been great to be part of that. I've never really been part of something like this from the start. I mean, obviously, I'm super proud of you and everything that you've achieved. For me personally, you're doing Political Dispatch was just a way of staying connected with you and Sid, really. It's a way of because that's another thing I suppose we'll talk about in a bit, but finding the people, your community is really important, and we'll get back to that. And now, the network has passed over 50,000 downloads, lots of shows and lots of things coming online. And I suppose that is an example of agency. That's, what I mean when I say we have more power than we think. You can make a choice of starting something.
Yeah, and I do think I had to keep making that choice. And I think the biggest choice that I had to make was doing it full time and making that decision to kind of really take the leap. But that is something that you have to kind of, it gets very hard, but you kind of have to keep going. And it does help to have a community around. But have you had moments like that, Tom?
Yeah, so my moment was an individual one, I suppose. In October 2024, I was in New York. I headed to the Met. I was going to go to the subway, and I accidentally stumbled upon a Trump rally at Madison Square Garden.
I know this one. This is a good one.
There were MAGA hats everywhere, two-man band playing Civil War marching music or era music. There was this massive queue snaking around the block, and Trump's face was on this huge digital screen. It said, "Dream big again." And I just stood there thinking, why is he here, right? He's in deep blue New York a week before the election. And then it hit me, if his team were happy to indulge this Madison Square sort of garden spectacle side quest, they must have sensed victory was already tied up. So this wasn't 2016, this was something much bigger. Popular vote, electoral college, probably Congress too. And part of me wanted to join the queue to see the show, maybe even get a MAGA camp. And I know it would have been endorsing him, but and the ideology, which doesn't align with me and my values, but I really wish I bought at least one hat for my friend Alex, because he would have loved it. I felt like I was living in history, part of history. So part of me was anxious. Would security question my British passport? Was it dangerous to be there?
And what did you end up choosing to do that day?
Well, I chose the Met over the circus, but that moment clarified something for me. I could sense history playing out. One chapter of my life ending and another uncertain one beginning. And I knew I wanted to document it and tell that story. So I turned my whole trip, New York, New Orleans, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., into a 4-part podcast series called Going Spare in the USA. And it was, partly ego, partly also I'd spent a lot of money on this trip. So it was letting people know I'd been on it. But I wanted people to know that I'd sort of been there, that it was also historical. And we'll talk about Orwell in a bit, but he has reasons for writing. Orwell has this sort of, one of the reasons for writing is the desire to see things as they are and store them up for sort of posterity.
That trip helped you find your field and sit in it as well?
Yes, yeah, I think so. Yeah, because I'd started the podcast, I'd started Spur of Thought, but it really got me thinking about storytelling, using my platform to document things that matter, to amplify voices. So I started this podcast in like October, I think October 2024, and then I wanted to make sense of the chaos, so that the trip energized me. I went from like quite relatively small numbers of people per episode, and then by the spring, some of the most engaged episodes, like 150 downloads, which in the grand scheme of things isn't that huge, but it's a lot more than when I started.
We've talked about this in our network meetings, but growth isn't always about the numbers, and it's not always about the listeners. Sometimes it's about showing up, publishing the episode, getting better with each episode that you publish, and telling stories that matter to you. I think that can also be growth, feeling really good about what you're putting out into the world. That's also really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very important for two reasons. Firstly, we live in a really noisy world. And so you're competing with a lot of things going on. You're competing with a lot of other podcasts, a lot of other distractions. We live in an attention economy. More and more I'm seeing like AI videos, and I'm like, oh, actually, this isn't real. Or, people are liking stuff. That's a cute cat. I was thinking it was AI generated. But even with like Gemini 3 now, it's very difficult to distinguish. But the other thing, which is really important, is you never know who's watching, right? So when you're putting this stuff out there, you don't know whose eyeballs it's going to reach. And there's this story about Frank Marshall. So he's a producer. And in the early 1970s, he was making a film in Europe. And he was looking after this young American director who was promoting his debut film. They went to lunch. Mid-meal, Marshall got a call. There was an issue on set. So he could have said, no, I've got to look after this director. But instead he apologized and he went to sort it out. A few years later, that young director was making his first big budget film. And the studio needed a producer. The director remembered Marshall. He wanted someone who was dedicated to his work, so he hired him, someone that was reliable. That film was Jaws. The director was Steven Spielberg. And together they became one of the most successful partnerships in Hollywood history.
You never know who's watching. That's actually, my dad always says that. I feel like he probably tells me that like once, maybe at least once a month, maybe at least once a week. That's what I've grown up with. But yeah, you never know who's watching.
Yeah. And so it's really important to show up, be on time, work hard, be someone people want to work with. Those aren't like sort of that isn't sexy, but they're how like creatives live, get their lives built. And it's like showing up and being yourself. And that key thing of being someone other people want to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not necessarily about the big moments where you think, oh, this is my break. This is going to be the thing that gets me fame or, notoriety. I don't think those are the moments that matter the most. It's about how you show up in the small ones and how those small ones and those small interactions stack up in the long run.
Exactly. And that's like what raises a question here of like, why do we do this? Why find your field in the first place? What's actually driving us? And George Orwell wrote in an essay called Why I Write, he identified 4 motives for writing. And I think they sort of all apply for creative work as well. So first is like sheer egoism. So like the desire to seem clever, to be talked about, to be remembered. The second is like aesthetic enthusiasm, like the perception of beauty, the joy of making something, of like putting art out there for the sake of art. And then 3 is like the historical impulse. It's like a desire to see things as they are, to preserve them for posterity. So that's sort of one of the reasons why I did that mini-series when I was out in America. And then the 4th is the political purpose, the desire to push the world in a certain direction.
And which one do you think drives you, Tom?
Sometimes ego will be there, obviously. But honestly, I think like a mix of 3 and 4, like historical impulse and political purpose. I'm drawn to preserving stories that might otherwise be lost, and to be pushing back against narratives that accept injustice as inevitable. And that's what drives my podcast work, and that's what drove a AGM campaign that we've talked about previously, and I'll also talk about in a bit. What about you? What's sort of driving Be the Change?
I think for me, it's probably honestly a little bit of all four. I think I really resonate the most with 2, 3, and 4. I mean, I think, like you said, there's going to be a little bit of ego in any of this stuff. Obviously, we're the ones talking on a mic. I think it would be naive to think that there's not a little bit of that. But I think for me, 2, 3, and 4 are more in the essence of the work that I actually create. I think when you say podcasting, a lot of people have a perception that it is just you speaking into a mic and you have a desire to hear yourself speak. But I think with our podcast, Tom, with Spare Thought, and with Be the Change podcast, we're asking questions of guests. And so it's actually, for me, I like to say, I think my episodes end up about 90% the guest talking and 10% me. When you look at my actual like timeline, that's what it is. It's very small portions of me speaking. So I don't think it's necessarily about people hearing me talk as much as it is other people. I think the joy of having conversations with really inspiring people can be that aesthetic enthusiasm, but I think also historical and political purposes as well. Having these conversations with people and preserving their thoughts in that moment in time and being able to share their stories is really beautiful to me, but I also think it holds a lot of purpose. And I hope that in decades, my podcast will still be available, and maybe some of the guests that I have, their stories will resonate with generations to come. And I think that's a really important thing. That joy and that hope that these conversations will be useful for many, many people, even decades to come, is really beautiful for me to think about. And I think, I hope that that's something that happens with them. I think that I've talked with so many great guests who have incredible stories, and it is really their stories that I enjoy sharing and those conversations that I enjoy having. So that's probably what drives me, but kind of sappy, but
Yeah, that's
it's
cool.
important.
It's important. Yeah. Okay, so once you found something worth pursuing, you face the next challenge. How do you keep going? How do you sustain creative work when it's hard? Like, keeping the candle burning is really important. So we talked about finding a field, making the choice to pursue, but also the hard part is like sustaining it, especially now in December when it's dark by 4 p.m. and everything feels much harder.
Yeah, I think winter is definitely tough for creative work, especially in the UK.
Yeah, we thought to make an art form of like having very depressing winters. It's not like it's even that extreme weather either. It's very much, well, getting more extreme, but generally, it's not like a Nordic winter, but somehow it's just miserable and crap here. Yeah. And it really is. And I think this is where small practices matter, not the big romantic gestures, but the daily choices that keep the candle burning. For me, that's my writing group. I've been going to a writing group at Chapter Arts for 9 years. So
9 years. That's crazy.
I sent to Brian, who runs the classes. It's like 10-year. We're going to have our 10-year anniversary. It's like, should we go on Orient Express or something? Do we like do something to celebrate? And some weeks, so I've got my group tomorrow. Some weeks I just don't want to go. Like, I'm tired. It's cold. It's depressing outside. But I've had, I had a long week at work. But showing up is the practice. Like, writing in community is the practice. And the group has been essential. It's where I test ideas, where I get feedback. It's where I stay accountable to the work.
And what does writing in community actually look like when you're going to these groups, Tom?
Yeah, so we meet monthly. Bryony brings writing prompts, and we write for like 20 minutes. We have a bit of lunch, and then we read our work aloud afterwards. We give gentle feedback to one another. It's not about being critical. Like, Bryony's thing is, you can't be critical of something that's just come out of your brain onto the page, like as a first draft. The best thing it can do is just to exist, and you can't be critical of that. As someone that's very critical of my work, like, that is so alien to me. So it's actually like it's freedom to just write, and it's not about being brilliant. It's about being present. about reminding yourself that you're a creative person even when the world feels quite grey and depressing. And the person that runs it, Bryony, she's been a mentor for me for years. She once told me that creativity isn't about waiting for inspiration, it's about creating the conditions where inspiration can find you.
That's so cool. I think that that's such a great quote. And, you actually it puts the agency on you, which I think is really important. I think saying, "Oh, I'm not a creative person," or "Oh, I could never do that." I think that that's a cop out. This is actually encouraging you to find those conditions and do it yourself. So I love that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where like the winter practices are about, journaling, drawing, knitting, writing short stories, not because they're going to be your big breakthrough, but because they keep you in conversation with your creative self. So my brother painted for years of retail jobs and depressing British winters. You recorded episodes during the pandemic. There's like the big glorious moments or the big sort of like life-changing moments like me going to Madison Square Garden, or Olivia Dean playing Glastonbury, or Dimoldenberg with all the incredible stars that she's had. But the real work happens in the winter, in the small, quiet, persistent acts that nobody sees.
It's so true. And I think people underestimate how much creative work is just maintenance and the little things. Keeping the practice alive when you don't feel like it, I think, is a huge thing. And it's those small things that you have to do. It's the writing of titles and descriptions and updating websites and things like that, which are all of the unsexy things, but they have to be done in order for the project to go ahead. And I think that that's really important. So yeah, it's the persistence and doing the things that have to be done, the little things on the side.
Exactly. So I'm working on a project now that's sort of teaching me this. It's a mini series about my grandfather's book, Curly's War. He was a Royal Marine Commando in World War II, and now I'm turning his memoir into sort of podcast episodes.
So cool. It's awesome. It's such a good idea.
But it's also like slow and quiet, and it's not sort of going viral, but it matters to me, and it's in him. It's preserving this history that we have in our family history. It's involved members of my family too. So I like email my uncle and ask him questions about it. I talk to my mum. In a couple of weeks, I'm talking to my cousin and my brother about Granddad and about the things that we learned from him. So it's like, it's become like a family thing, which is really cool. And we're in all different places and don't see each other that much. So it's a nice way of staying connected. And not everything has to be a hit. Sometimes creative work is just about doing something meaningful that matters to you. It doesn't have to involve hundreds of people, thousands, millions. It could just be very personal to you.
That's permission that people need to hear because we're so conditioned to get those likes and to have that gratification, and everything has to scale and grow and be a success. I'm working on a new podcast, and it's about people's passions and how sometimes passions can just be for you. And they really want this to showcase how young people sometimes think that we need to monetize everything that we're doing, or we need to film everything that we're doing in order to share that with the world and in order to get those likes and get the eyes on you. But sometimes you can do things and you can post things just because you love them, and it doesn't have to be for anyone else. I think that's really important, and kind of flipping that metric of maybe it's not about the audience, maybe it's about what this story is doing for you and your emotions. That's really, really important. So I think that's a great point, Tom.
And I've been sort of learning this recently with Substack. So I've been trying to build a following there, and I felt like really like pushing the boulder uphill. I was posting hoping people would subscribe, feeling discouraged when they didn't. And then I actually started engaging, commenting on other people's work, sort of restacking articles that resonated with me, having conversations in the notes features. And the two things happened. I started enjoying it more, and people started noticing me, not because I was performing, but because I was participating.
And I think that's the shift, is from broadcasting to participating, and from building your audience and being worried about who's watching to joining a community, which I think we're doing with Be the Change Media Network too. So got to put that little plug in there. But I think it's that shift that's really important.
Keep pushing that, keep plugging it. Important. And that's what we're trying to do, as you say, on Be the Change. And for you it started as a voice memo, then it became a network because you realized that other people needed the platform too. And when are you able to talk about the academy at all?
Yeah, for sure. The Academy, Be the Change Media Academy, is what allowed me to go full time with Be the Change Media Network, which is awesome. But we got a grant to develop a training program for ethical content creation. So, storytelling and how to exist more safely online. So, it's going to cover lots of different topics, and that's a huge, broad topic to try to tackle and to try to train people. But I think it's a really important resource that we're creating. It's going to be an online course, but also there's going to be in-person workshops that are hosted across the UK. And it will be accessible to anyone, but I think it's mostly going to be focused for young people who might just be emerging in their creative journeys and just getting started with some of these projects because it's so hard to get started with a lot of this stuff. And for me, my creative journey started with having to look up how to podcast, what podcast microphone should I be using, things like that, which I did a lot of the research on my own. And I was actually trained to be a journalist. So I was in journalism school, and a lot of that helped me. But so many people don't have that opportunity. So being able to provide people with a resource that they can learn how to podcast, how to write blogs, how to create short videos, how to create longer form videos, more like a documentary style. And then there's also going to be a section for advanced creators who might already have some of these platforms or might be creating their own work. They'll be able to still utilize the platform, hopefully, but it's still in its very early stages. We're filming all of the content right now, but I think that it's going to be a wonderful way to democratize creativity a little bit more and allow people to have access to really necessary materials that are also created by people with a social impact focus. I think that's really important because, of course, that's the golden thread through everything that we do at Be the Change Media Network is making sure that we're making the world a better place. So that's part of our community and trying to make sure that we're creating together and we're creating for social good, which I think is the important part to make. There might already be things that exist in this way, but having people who really have that mindset of making the world a better place, I think is where Be the Change Media Network is unique. And that's more of the value that we can bring because all of us are very committed to using our stories for good. Be the Change Media Academy. It's coming.
And again, it's another form of community, isn't it?
Mhm.
Forming a different type of community. Also opening the door for young people into the industry if they want to pursue a creative life in the media or elsewhere. And again, it's thinking about, particularly in these winter months, connecting people, being part of a writing group, being part of the network, the folks that, who are also helping us to keep us going, because on your own, it sort of, it can be like quite easy to give up too. And when you have that community, when you're sustaining that work, here's what becomes possible. You can make a contribution. So you can use your platform, however small, to make what John Lewis calls good trouble, necessary trouble. And when I say John Lewis, and it's Christmas time, or, early January by the time I was...
Gotta make that clarification.
Yeah, we're not talking about the shop. We're talking about a very important civil rights leader in America. When I went back to study after 10 years of work to do my master's, I was passionate about how the university was treating international students. So I campaigned to create a full-time vice president international students. And we got a motion to AGM, and I spoke in support of it. I told this story about a Palestinian PhD student who I met years earlier, and she was doing her doctorate while her two young sons stayed in Palestine with her family. She felt guilty about leaving them, but they were proud of her, and she was willing to sacrifice so much to study at Cardiff. And I said this story is one of thousands. So international students face hostile immigration system, racism, culture shock, and yet their students' union isn't sort of fighting their corner. And today that can change on that day. The motion passed by like the tiniest margin, and we created a full-time role to represent over 6,000 students at Cardiff.
Helps so many people. I think you were campaigning to help others. And of course, then that led to us also getting in touch and stuff, which I'm very grateful. It's that ripple effect. But, you were campaigning with other people in mind. And it's so great because you are not an international student. I think that's also the important thing is you were doing this all to help other people. So I just want to point that out and give you a little bit more credit because you're being very humble with this. But I think you were doing all of this to support other people and using your own lived experiences working with people. But this was, in support of others. And as an international student, it was very great to see that. So thank you, Tom. But helping others, it's awesome.
Thanks for saying that, Lee. What did struck me at the time is that in all my years of working at the university as a staff member, I had so little power to change the narrative. But as a student, asserting the right influence in the right place, I created a structural change. And now you can make an argument whether that change was the thing that was needed. And I'm sure colleagues at the university would say, Tom, maybe not so much. But also, I suppose it's like that thing as well. The greatest lesson I had from it, it was very difficult to do. And it was only the first part of the story. And I'd run out of energy supporting it because I threw so much of myself in. But it's not necessarily about making a change. It's about what you do after that to sustain it. And that's been a really good lesson for me, is that the campaign winning an election, getting a legislation changed is the first part of the story. It's not the end. It's not the end point. It's like the beginning of a new part of the journey. This is why people get quite down in the dumps after a big event or, they've got that job that they've always wanted to go for. It's then the bit afterwards that comes, which is really important and to remember. A good story changed the room. It got the votes needed to get over the line. And that's the power that we have if we choose to use it. We talked about finding your field and sustaining the work. Now I want to talk about your contribution, making, as John Lewis said, good trouble, necessary trouble.
I think about this a lot because a lot of the creators at Be the Change Media Network, but also a lot of I'd assume the audience who listens to my podcast, Be the Change podcast, might want to make change and they might want to make a difference, but don't know how to get started. And I also think there's this really serious anxiety around how big these problems are that so many young people in particular face, because we're going to be dealing with these problems for the rest of our lives. And it can be really scary to think about climate change or to think about AI regulation or to think about these massive issues. So yeah, I think this is a really important place for us to talk about how to actually get started and what that looks like and what your contribution can be to a wider system.
And I get that. And I felt that way standing in Madison Square Garden watching Trump supporters queue around the block. The forces shaping the future felt decided. The concentration of wealth and power felt overwhelming. But here's what I've learned, that bubbles burst, markets crash, the world turns upside down. The thing that survives is talent, intention, and agency. The only countermeasure against the massive centralized power is a distributed network of people making good trouble.
And what does that actually look like in practice, do you think?
I think it looks like using your platform, whatever that is, to tell stories that matter and responsibly as well. That's really important, that you having that journalistic through line, even if you haven't trained in journalism, is the ethics of it, how you're telling stories ethically. You are the local watchdog, so you're the person who can ask the questions others aren't asking. As you highlighted, Lily, in a TED talk you did, which we'll share in the show notes, a study by NACRO found that media coverage of under 25s is twice as likely to be negative than positive. So young people are portrayed as lazy, weak, selfish, or dangerous, but only 21% of those articles actually featured young people's voices.
This kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier, but about how you sharing a story can be really powerful, and we don't always think about that. You talking to your friends or your family or your community, using your voice and what you saw can be so powerful. So I love that idea, the local watchdog, Tom, and you are the person that can ask those questions and your perspective matters, because I think, like you mentioned, often young people are being talked about and not actually listened to. So trying to change that narrative, and that can start with anyone sharing any story, because that matters and that's important.
Yeah, exactly. Which means it's up to young people to share their own stories, And that's what you're doing with Be the Change and creating the infrastructure that's supporting that.
When you have you don't have to necessarily wait for someone to give you a platform. I think that's the really important part. But when there are structures that can support you, I guess that's what we've also created with the network, and also now that we're doing with the academy, because like you were saying, Tom, sometimes you just need that support and that nudge to keep going. So sometimes it is nice to know that people are listening to you and looking at your content or sharing your stories with their community. So yeah, I think it's pairing that first initial step and you sharing stories or you sharing your voice with a community of people who are also really passionate about that. That's how we make change. That's the ripple effect. So yeah, I'll just add in that little extra tidbit there. It's all about, of course, you being the individual and sharing your stories, but also being a part of a community is the way that massive change happens.
Yeah, and that's a bit like my friend's daughter, who's when we were talking about the style, it's very depersonalized because it's like AI. So it's about finding the people to surround yourself that sort of that can inspire you and get you excited to do the work that you're doing, and that's the work. So like building alternative while pushing for systematic change. So I've written about systematic problems in a LinkedIn post, which I'll share in the notes, sort of factory model of education, the algorithmic sort of gatekeeping of it all. That's like that sort of diagnosis. But today's conversation has been about the response to that. So finding your field, choosing to participate, keep the candle burning through winter, make your contribution, because we can't wait for the system to fix itself.
And you're not alone trying to make the changes. That's what I keep coming back to, I think, throughout this conversation is it's about community. And when I started my podcast, it was just me with a voice memo hitting submit week after week. But now we have 40 plus people across 7 countries on the network, and we're building the community that we want together, which I think is just incredible. So I'll pat us on the back, Tom. But
yeah. Well done, everyone. And community matters, finding your people. But it starts with you making a choice, choosing to hit record, choosing to show up to the writing group, choosing to engage on Substack, choosing to tell the story that needs telling. And that's agency. And that's how creative lives are actually lived. One choice at a time, sustained over years in community with others who are doing the same thing.
This is kind of classic because this is my classic question that I ask at the end of my podcast episodes. But what would you say to someone who's listening at the beginning of their journey and they haven't found their field yet? What advice would you want to give them?
My initial feeling would be which I've said earlier, which is to start. But I think start with a bit of intention as well. Think about the things that you're good at. Before a colleague of mine left the university, he sat me down and gave me a bit of like career advice, unsolicited career advice. I thought it was quite intense at the time, but it's quite useful. He said the perfect sort of job or sort of vocation to have is something that you enjoy, something you're good at, and something ideally that pays the bills, that gets you through that. There's a lot of people who really enjoy what they're doing, but they're not good at it. And if you're not good at it, then it probably won't get you very far if that's the thing you want to pursue. And so it's sort of like you've got to find what you're good at is really important. And that's experimenting. That's just diving in. That's about picking up a pen and starting writing, or a paintbrush, or starting typing a story, or starting a blog, or whatever it is. And then it's like paying attention to the things that energizes you, things that you can't stop thinking about. What do you do even if nobody's watching? And be persistent. So you've got Dave's decade, Amelia's years on YouTube, Olivia's gigs in empty fields, your 1 a.m. voice memo becoming a network, basically. My 9 years in a writing group. It takes time, and that's okay. And find your people, join a community, participate. Don't just broadcast. The work is easier when you're not doing it alone.
And you have so much more power than you think. I think all of our stories and our lived experience hold so much power, especially if you are a student or early in your career. You have so much power, but also access to lots of networks and people I'm sure that you can reach out to. You have time and you also have less to lose. You can experiment a little bit. You can try things out. This is the time in your life where you should be doing that. And if something fails, you learned a lesson, and that's really good. So use that. You're at a great time where your life can be taken in so many different directions. And I think that's wonderful. So I'm also saying these things like I'm like at the end of my life looking back, which I'm not, but I feel like I just I want to throw that in there. We all have lots of time, and I want to leave everyone with that. You know, use that power, take that agency, and make your life what you want. You know, experiment, try things out. That's not going to hurt, and you're only going to live with regret looking back if you don't do it. So why not just try?
One of my first managers in when I was working in student unions said to me that the thing that we need to do is create a space where students can fail in a safe environment, and that's really important. To me, the best teacher I've ever had is failure. I don't learn from success because a lot of the time success is a bit of a fluke. Like it someone notices something you've read, or it goes, the algorithm just makes things go viral. And you talk to any social media manager and they're like, I have no idea how that thing got 100,000 views or 1 million views. We were just messing about in the office. We put it out there and it became a trend. So that's sort of something really important to remember. It's about also telling good stories. It's holding power to account. It's making good trouble. On those dark winter nights when everything feels hard and you're not sure why you're doing this, keep going. Do the small thing, write the page, record the episode, show up to the group, because it's what Albert Camus said. And I think about this sort of the perfect way to close. I love this quote. In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer. And that makes me happy, for it says that no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me, there's something stronger, something better, pushing right back.
And that's it, I think, is the invincible summer, the choice to create despite your other circumstances, despite all of the other things that might be going on. That's the choice that you have to make.
Yep, that's the choice, the agency, and that's how you live a creative life. If you want to read more about some of the systematic challenges we've touched on today, like the education model, which we haven't talked about so much, but the algorithmic gatekeeping I've written about in a recent LinkedIn newsletter, which I'll share in the notes. And if you're a young person listening who wants to develop your voice, find your community, tell your stories, you can reach out to Be the Change Media Network. Lily, how can people find how to listen and get involved?
What a wonderful little tease for us, Tom. Thank you. You can find us on, LinkedIn and Instagram are probably the best places. We also do have a website, but LinkedIn, Be the Change Media Network, and then Instagram, Be the Change Media Network as well. I think the key with Be the Change Media Network, which if you're listening to this, you wouldn't be able to hear it, but there's a full stop after Be the Change. So when you're typing it in, that's the best way to find it. Just make sure that you include that period. So Be the Change, period, Media Network. But we're also going to have so many more podcasts and blogs and new content coming out in New Year. And we're going to have a newsletter that's going to be coming out. So Tom has been very helpful with developing that, and it's going to be really exciting. And we also are going to be launching the Academy in March. So if anyone's listening to this and thinking that you want to create something new, the Academy is coming out and will be a really great resource for you, hopefully, to be able to learn a little bit about how to do those things, the more practical tools that you might need to get started. And come join us. We would, I'm sure, love to have you. So come and pitch.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the most recent, all the pictures have been great, but there was one particular group recently, and I was like, oh man, all these are like if there's anything you could represent in the fire emoji, it'd be, it's pretty cool. I know. I love being surprised. Like it's things I just wouldn't. A lot of topics I wouldn't necessarily think about as well, and go, oh yeah, this is like so cool that someone's thinking about this and cares about this. So yeah, so that's the end of today's program. Thanks for listening. Program? What am I? Broadcaster? Thanks for listening to Spare a Thought. This has been Living a Creative Life. Spare a Thought is a Be the Change Media Network production. I'm Tom Spare.
And I'm Lily Mott.
Keep the candle burning, make good trouble, and whatever you do, find your field and sit in it. I think I knocked my table. I'm going to have to do that again. Act natural, Lily. Keep the fire burning, make good trouble, and whatever you do, find your field and sit in it.